did throw those over here to me. Your copy.
Oh, I gave it to you.
You know, yeah. Lost it.
This is just the 12. Sorry.
That's all right, yeah. Rick's probably stole mine.
Is it in your copy? The one that, yeah.
Okay. There you go, yep. Okay. Any items raised from page 1? Items from page 2. Have we got a quorum?
Debbie just went out to...
No.
Not yet. No.
Okay. Tanya is holding us up. We haven't got a quorum. Yeah. Well, even with her, does that constitute a quorum?
14.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
One short. Debbie just went out for a moment.
I'll go out and have a look in the corridor. What a shame we got home.
Thank you all.
You're thinking the same as
The
me.
most productive REC meeting I've ever attended.
I can go and do my veggie garden. I'm organic, Peter. I'm organic, my baby. We've got 14.
14.
Okay, so I inadvertently missed the apologies. Fenton Wilson. Fenton.
Yeah, I have to leave this meeting early to attend another meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Can we check the quorum and the timing of when people are leaving, because otherwise we might lose the quorum today?
Well, Dev just said the first one's 2:30.
No, I'm going to be like about 2.
2.
2.
3.
Oh, we're definitely going to lose them.
So, yeah, okay, that gives us, so please do not give us any diatribes unnecessarily. Yeah, we'll get through things.
Does that include the chair?
Yeah, me too. I will not, I'll leave my high horse alone.
Same planning to the election year.
Okay.
Can we move?
All apologies be accepted, please.
Aye.
Okay. Confirmation of the minutes.
Sorry, who was the mover of the minute?
Oh, sorry, who was the mover?
I'll second.
Alan, yeah. Thank you. All in favour? Okay. So there were no conflicts of interest declared, and so we're moving on to confirmation of the minutes. The 19th of September. So, items, anyone want to raise an issue in terms of page 1, page 2, page 3? Someone moves that minutes be received, please. A true and accurate record and will be adopted. Okay, Councillor Bevan and Councillor Jenny Smith. Thank you. All in favour? Right. Follow-ups. That was Tom, I assume. You can have those back. Oh, no. Sorry, mate, thank you. No questions? Okay. I'll move that be received. Oh, make that. Seconder?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All in favour? Okay, so I'm just going to I was going to rearrange the agenda, but given we've got this deadline in terms of getting the decision items sorted, we'll deal with the national policy statement.
Moving straight to decision. So I'll just invite Gavin Ide to come and speak to the paper. afternoon, committee members.
Kia ora.
Good afternoon.
This is a decision item. The decision that's in front of you today is to consider whether or not this committee recommends that Council adopt a third edition of a revised progressive implementation program for implementing the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. You'll recall that last year the NPS for freshwater management was amended, and one of those amendments enabled councils across the country to go back and revise their progressive implementation programs and publish those before the end of this calendar year. So there's a statutory deadline looming, that is by the end of this year the council must have adopted a revised program. It has two options. One is to roll over the current version, which was adopted back in 2015, or adopt a revised one. So following on from decisions made in the LTP earlier this year, there is some certainly resourcing in place for implementing the National Policy Statement, particularly in terms of implementing and updating our RMA planning documents. Without a clear crystal ball, we can't be absolutely sure as to when all of that will be wrapped up. For example, the tank plan change in our earlier second edition of the Progressive Implementation Program would have been well and truly notified by now, but as you know, you're still kicking the tyres on it in your workshop. There are many things coming at us as a committee, as a council, as a community from central government in the coming years. We can't ignore that, but we still have to make some decisions on what we know today around our progressive implementation program. So I'm just foreshadowing that there are likely to be some inevitable further amendments to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater, and certainly other national instruments for the way freshwater is managed in New Zealand. But when the details of that is much more clearer than it is right now, in that future time, we might have to revisit our progressive implementation program again. But for now, staff are recommending the third edition of the PIP, Progressive Implementation Program, that is set out in one of the appendices to this report. Clear feature of it this time around is that full implementation of the NPSFM by this council is no longer shooting for 2025, but in all reality, it's going to be more like by the end of 2030. This recommendation here is putting it in clear terms that if we were to strive and aspire to do everything that we need to do by 2025, there will be some sacrifices in terms of quality of planning for starters.
So, has anyone got any issues with this recommendation?
Pretty straightforward.
Do you have some questions, Chair?
Yeah, well, that's
About this particular...
those with issues have a priority. So
Well, I mean, the page 17, you've got for the plan change for the Mohawk catchment, notified proposed plan change estimated in 2021 but no later than 24, and then on page 18 you've got the one about the New Haka, Te Pronga House, so on, again no later than 2024. So are they going to be run concurrently, or one's coming after the other, or?
So Mohaka was one of the council's long-standing top three priority catchment areas. So it's still, for now, programmed as its own thing. But in terms of the other catchments in the region that aren't Tank, that aren't Tupi and aren't Mohaka, our design in mind is that yes, there are opportunities for all those other catchments to be run in some sort of parallel process. Exactly what? We haven't turned our minds to the greater detail of that.
It concerns me that you've used the term estimated are going to be in there. So it sounds like you're not actually, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. Whereas the other ones you've got on there no later than a certain particular date.
So if I could, and I suppose as Gav mentioned, is that, so this is the second crank of the handle on this, or was it the third crank of the handle on this, and yeah, and we had a plan, and as was mentioned before, tank was meant to be done and dusted by now, so I think, as we're getting our continuous learnings around how to manage these processes, and in the same way as this committee, we learn how to bring and develop in conjunction with this committee these plan changes. It's our hope and expectation that we do deliver these quickly, but where history tells us that they're not easy, and that can be just a part of getting the process, through this committee and getting to and through this committee. Then there are obviously other parts beyond that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, but if all you're doing is estimating a completion date by, then that's open to coming out. Instead of putting we intend having it no later than a certain date, then that puts a priority on it.
Yeah, so we must have it done by 2030.
Councillor Bell,
I'm going to say advice.
No, I just want to remove the motion, the recommendations.
very good. We have a seconder.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favour of the motion, or the recommendation?
Aye.
Thank you. Very good. We'll move on to item 7.
Okay, so I'm going to recall to the table Mary Ann, Kerry and Rena, if you can be available. So just because we live and breathe this and often make the assumption that we'll often lose sight of the fact that you have large gaps between when you come back and address these and things like that. It's just important just to quickly cover off that what we're really asking for here, and as the process that we're bringing this plan through, is actually your drafting instructions for what we're calling version 8 of the plan to come to you for deliberation when it's our anticipation and hope that we can have that version 8 in front of this committee for the 12th of December meeting, and so that's our current projection. The purpose of having a version 8 of the plan is for this committee to consider whether that is in a shape or form that can go out for what we call Schedule 1, pre-notification consultation, and so that's a matter that's covered in in another paper, an information paper that we can talk about more at that stage. So the three matters which sit there in the recommendations, 2 of which we've discussed this morning as part of the workshop in terms of nutrient and drinking water. The third, stormwater, wasn't necessarily a matter of non-consensus, but I think through the workshops and the discussions we had, is that you asked for some more feedback and input into certain aspects of that, and so it's an update on that. So I suppose what I'm wanting to avoid is a sense on behalf of committee members that this is that as we're doing this, that that you are locking yourselves down. This is actually about drafting up a final version to come to you in its totality. And we can talk more about that pathway when we discuss the information item later on. So with that, who am I handing to? Probably Mary Ann.
I'll start with the first one. The first issue was around managing nutrient loss and the managing land use change, as we were talking about this morning. The paper looks at the issue generally and the agreements of the tank group. It refers to how sediment was managed to provide some context around some of the modelling for meeting things like a 30% reduction, comparing sediment loss with managing nutrients, which was, as described this morning, much more complex and somewhat limited by the available information that we have. And with the key area of maybe non-consensus is the wrong term. It's more understanding how best to manage land use change through regulation in the plan. And a number of options were considered that are described in the paper, and the recommended approach being based on an acceptable threshold of loss. There is still some work to be done. There is a suggestion that there are schedules still to be developed that provide more understanding around what we mean by land use change, both to provide better guidance for compliance officers by the council, but also in terms of landowners, so they understand what we mean by land use change. So there's much more clarity, I guess, around the kinds of activities we're looking at targeting by the new rule. So I'm presuming the questions this morning covered a lot of the issues that you had with this. Don't know if there are any more questions. Answer.
Okay. Any further? Sorry, Councillor Good.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. I just wonder whether you can help me because I'm really struggling with this notion around change versus land use. And I'm assuming that under a farm environment plan, we are managing land use. And in that land use, there'll be nitrogen, for example, nitrogen losses. One factor in the farm management plan will be measuring, for example, nitrogen loss will be one element. So I'm struggling with, under your table 2 on page 25, option 4, you are saying in the costs could result in catchment or farm plan mitigations being undermined. So if you've got a farm environment plan in place with its stated limits, loss limits, irrespective of the land use or the land use change, the expectation is the land user would meet those minimum requirements. Tell me why is it said in this table that that process is undermined by a land use change?
What's being undermined under that option 4 is that if there are no direct regulations and you have, for instance, a farmer collective in a catchment that are trying to meet water quality outcomes, if there's no tool or method to control land use change, you will undermine the ability of those farmers to meet the objectives that are set for water quality. So, for example, say in a catchment you have a bunch of sheep farmers, for example, and one of them wants to move to dairy farming, and they're in a catchment that has a water quality problem. You kind of need some mechanism that identifies where a land use change of that order and regulates it so that you can put measures in place so the efforts of the sheep farmers in meeting the outcomes being sought are not then undermined by that land use change. So that's what I mean by undermining.
But you've got a land use in place. You've got a plan which specifies what that land use is and its limits. What I'm concerned is that when you make a land use change, I go from sheep to dairy, my expectation is that the farm environment plan would also need to change, and those limits would be specified there. So I'm curious to know why there is a loss of control by us as the regulator on that. What is different about that land use?
Because there is no limit set for that land use. They're looking at...
But wouldn't the FEMP specify what that limit is?
No.
There are no proposed
There are no limits. There's no property scale limit being set.
That's a key distinction between Plan Change 6 and this plan change. And that's been it's been recommended by the Tank Group on the basis of some of the uncertainties and also the extent to which nitrogen is a problem needing to be managed relative to the costs of trying to manage it in the same way that PC6 does.
Isn't that a shortcoming of the Farm Environment Plan?
Well, the Farm Environment Plan will have to quantify the losses, and it will also have to meet industry best practice. So there will have to be efforts to minimise nitrogen loss, but there's no quantitative regulatory limit being imposed through it, other than the trigger point for the land use change rule.
So one of the first parts of the first recommendation is about the retaining of policy 16A. So to help us get through all of this, can we do it bit by bit? Because if we commit the council to allocating nitrogen at a property scale now, it can't be done because we don't have that information. So really, it's not an option. Can't do what you can't do.
That's very Irish. Well, that a little bit.
That's the Irish coming out of it. Recording. Probably Daniel O'Keefe in there somewhere.
Chair, can I just make the observation which might be helpful to Councillor Curtin, just in terms of the Plan Change 6 distinction? You might recall that in the development of Plan Change 6 through the Board of Inquiry, there was a dissolved inorganic nitrogen limit, a DIN limit of 0.8 milligrams per litre, 100 litre, put in the plan. The allocations at property level don't match that. They were allocated on essentially a best practice basis. The further work that we've got to do as a council in the fullness of time is reconciling the two of those. And that uncertainty about how they get reconciled is essentially a similar issue here. So rather than arbitrarily going and allocating and having to do a compliance regime, we're simply requiring adherence to industry best practice. And the farm plans will be viewed for their quality in that regard. But we're not going to try and run a compliance regime at this point in time, property by property, because the costs exceed the benefits.
So is the difference between the first three options and the fourth one, that in the first three, there would be, in whatever the trigger is in each of those three, there would be a consent required. And whereas in 4, we're saying there's no consenting involved at all, right? And so in the first 3, there is a consent, and the consent is triggered according to the footnote here. If there's a land use change that in blah, 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 increases 10%. Is that? So what typically, whichever trigger we ultimately decide on, what might a consent typically say? If I met the trigger point, I had a 10% change in what I'm doing, what might the consent require of me?
So that would be, if, hopefully it's here, in the attachment. One. Attached.
In the plan change or the...
Attach it. Oh, it was in the
Because you're implying there's not a standard you can make me meet. There's not a DIN limit. There's not a.
Yeah.
So what is the consent going to ask me to do?
So at the moment, the matters that the council would have discretion over include things like the measures that are being adopted by landowner collectives or through other farm plans in that catchment to meet water quality objectives. So it depends on the state of the water quality in the place where the land use change is happening and what is being done to mitigate or to meet those water quality standards, and the effect of the new land use in contributing to meeting water quality standards in that location. So it's going to be location specific. And it'll be, and how those objectives are going to be met, including by conditions on the consent around efficient use of nutrients, minimisation of losses, you know, the usual kind of mitigation measures that you might impose on that new land use through conditions on a consent. So much more control.
So it's going to tell me I have to mitigate, but it's not going to tell me it's not going to give me a required amount.
It could, not by the required amount, but it would be more in relation to the mitigation measures. So it might be things like wetland creation, it could be riparian management, so looking for the mitigation measures, but not in relation to a number.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And if there was a fertiliser regime, probably one of the low-hanging fruit would be limits on the application of nitrogen, artificial nitrogen in certain volumes on a hectare basis, that sort of thing.
And including timeframes, monitoring requirements as conditions of consent. So quite a tight level of control on that new land use activity in relation to nitrogen losses.
So it is it could require me to change my land use practice in ways that are known to mitigate nitrogen loss. And so I'm being told to do that. I'm just not being told by next Friday I have to be at DIN .44.
That's right.
Okay.
Correct. And I think, so the consenting staff would refer back to the policy, and they'd refer back to the objectives and the very reason for this rule. This rule was obviously designed to avoid increases in nitrogen by any substantial amount, and so they'd be looking for mitigations to ensure that doesn't happen. So, yeah, they will refer back to the plan in writing those conditions.
Yep.
Can I just check something with you around the drafting of 4A under Table 7 of our papers, which is on page 28. So I understand the conditions, you read them as and, like A and B, etc. So there's an and there. So this is what will capture people. The trigger for the 10% of the property, a change of land use over 10% of the property. When do you measure that if that's incremental? At what point in time do you trigger that? So could I do 5% one year and then 5% another year and 5% another year? When is the 10%? When do you trigger the 10%?
From the date of notification. So a change in 10% after that date.
So it's cumulative.
Yeah.
Date just hasn't been inserted in there.
Right. So then if I've changed my land use more than 10% of, my property, what happens after that?
That would trigger a consent requirement.
If after this date I then move up to 15%, do I have to come back for another consent? Is it 10% each time, or is it 10% then you increase it to 20% and you keep coming back?
Can you leave that with us to think through and sort out?
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, the nebulous part of the...
Well, I would have thought it was relatively easy. Actually, you've got a notification date, and at the point you've made a 10% change, you have to submit a new plan. That new plan is your effective new operational date, and if you make a further 10% subsequent to that, you'd need to put in another plan change. It's quite simple, really.
Process.
So you're asking us to endorse one of these 4 options. You're recommending number 2. Of the parties around the tank table, loosely separated to growers, environmentalists, Maori, where are the 3 parties on this issue?
It's a little bit hard to say precisely because the tank group has disbanded since this little bit of policy development has occurred. So I really can't tell you exactly what the feedback is. All I know for sure is that if there isn't some kind of threshold or consent requirement that governs land use change, there will be a number of parties around the tank group that will not be happy with that as an outcome.
Right. And do the grower folks agree that there should be that one of these 3 might meet their objections, or meet their test?
There's still some concern around the detail and how that might roll out in practice, but they are generally in agreement that yes, that there was something that was necessary.
Then I would move the recommendation.
As it amended?
As presented here. Oh, there.
Yeah.
I was looking at the paper, I'm sorry.
Are we doing this bit by bit?
Well, to help people understand.
Moved.
So that's the first part of the recommendation.
Can we go and have a look at
Otherwise, we're going to get lost in this
2.2.2?
big document.
No.
Stormwater one to the.
Has this changed?
I had proposed some amendments on behalf of the Tangata Whenua Roots, mainly to clarify, not actually changing in substance what we think is intended. So I guess if we're moving, Tom, are you moving the first part, obviously, the ones we've just discussed?
I'm not even looking at that, I'm just looking at the paper with number 3.
That's the proposed changes to the recommendation on the payment.
So we're at a mover, got a second.
It's just wording.
Really different issue.
Who's just checking the other?
Okay, all right.
Oh,
All I'm trying to do is move the staff recommendation, which is using the 170 kg a year trait.
This on page 30, Tom.
It's on page 25 of the agenda paper.
To JW.
Oh. There you go, but the recommendations are on page 30.
In the recommendations.
Yeah.
Can I suggest that, Mr Chair, that we just agree in principle as we go through these 3 elements to this paper, whether we agree or not in principle, and then we can just go over the finer details of the wording, because I think, I think that will just move us along, and then we can come to the wording at the end.
So does anyone want to propose a threshold other than 170 kgs a year? Trigger this.
No, I would support, along with Joynella, what's being proposed
And let's
is the
move-
recommendation.
Let's move to the next one then.
Okay, that's good.
So, moving on to the second issue.
We're not moving it.
No, okay.
We're not moving. So we're not going to,
Yeah,
my
okay.
suggestion is don't get into the wording, let's just get into the principle. Do we agree with what's being proposed?
That's just drinking water.
Yes. So item 2 is basically traversing what was discussed this morning on the drinking water rules and issues.
Yeah, is it, sorry, Chair, just a question. Is it possible to have some sort of completion date put in the rules for the SPZ for Napier City?
That would, without speaking for Napier City, it would largely depend on how they're progressing. I mean, I don't know. I haven't got a time frame for how they're going with their work.
Are we able to put, what I asked was, are we able to put a
Yeah, I
time frame
understand
in
what
there?
you asked,
I
but-
don't give a rat's bum what Napier City thinks. I want to know, can we put one in?
It depends if they've done the technical work to define the SPZ. If they haven't done the technical work to define the SPZ, then they get treated as a default with the 2K radius, or whatever that looks like. So they will be covered, but they'll either be a default or they will have done the technical work.
We were told this morning that a PPZ is not as stringent as an SPZ, that Napier City was going through the process to develop an SPZ like Hastings has, but they're going through the process, right? All I'm asking is, can we put a completion date in the plan, much the same way as we've done with FMPs had to be in by a certain date for Plan Change 6, just to make sure that Napier City actually gets the job done.
So perhaps if I could have a crack at this, given the fact that we are progressing a draft here, I wonder if I could, perhaps at your direction, Councillor, take it as a follow-up, I'll ask the question of Napier City Council in terms of what their timeframes are for this.
I'm happy.
And I'll report that to you, and then you can then make that decision in terms of the next
Just
draft.
to
Yeah, I mean, if Napier City said it's going to take us 12 months, then that's fine. Let's put a completion date of 31st of December 2019.
So you happy for me to take that as a follow-up?
Yeah, that's cool.
Just to add to that, the joint working group are actually meeting tomorrow and a debrief on the tank issues as they stand at the moment. So that'll be raised as part of that discussion, I imagine.
So can I ask a question? Who's on that group?
So
2028.
representatives from Hastings, Napier, the DHB, Wairoa, Central Hawke's Bay, Ngāti Kahungunu, of course, Regional Council, and a drinking water assessor.
Thank you.
What's the drinking water assessor look for, taste or colour?
It's enough from you. With the amount of whiskey in it.
So was the RPC asked to contribute a member to that committee, given we are meant to be associated with plans and policies?
So just to clarify, that working group is a creature of the Havelock North Drinking Water Inquiry. So they were set up under the terms of reference for that inquiry. Unrelated to council business. Yeah.
Thank you.
But can I just ask a follow-up question of that? I think in Tulu's remark is a request to have a representative of the RPC on it in addition to Kahungunu. So was that a possibility or not?
So
I believe it's staff only.
it is staff only, but there is a joint governance committee which is made up of chairs and mayors, and it is represented by several members of the RPC on that at the moment.
All right,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
Are those members, doesn't matter, comes to the same table.
We're just trying to join the dots here and there. Yeah. Okay, any further questions in regard to the
Water?
I'm prepared to accept the recommendations made this morning from the drinking water group.
So am I. I think they're excellent.
Anyone want to talk to them? All in favour?
We're not
Not moving it. We're not moving it. Nice try, Toodle.
See, it should be included in the
In
recommendations.
principle, we
We'll take the recommendations haven't yet been put down. So what are we doing here? What's the status of this? So we agree, we don't agree, we were thinking about it? I mean,
Did you just miss my last comment?
My understanding was we were having a discussion about the different elements before we moved it.
Yeah,
That was
that's
my
right.
understanding.
We're doing.
And I believe we've had that discussion.
Yep, I agree.
Why can't we move it? And
Because the wording, we're going to talk about the wording, so we've got one more to discuss, haven't we?
okay, sorry,
Stormwater.
my
Stormwater and-
confusion then.
Yeah, stormwater.
Okay.
Debate as well.
So moving into stormwater, at the RPC meeting of 14th of August, you will recall that we presented the package and we presented the elements of the rules and the issues and policies we were proposing. We received quite a strong directive from the RPC to go away and work in some more specific outcomes and measurables into how we were going to achieve those outcomes. So I have included in your briefing package at page 27. Sorry, 28. I've included a table which sets out how we've worked with TLAs to come back with some time-bound outcomes. And what I'm really keen to get across here is that we haven't just pulled numbers out of the air. We've actually worked out how the different parts of the puzzle will fit together, what needs to happen first before other parts can take place. Some of the dates you'll see are actually coming up really quickly, given that we are at the end, almost at the end of 2018. We've got a couple of 1st of January 2020 dates there, and the basis for that is that TLAs are confident that they are either already doing some of these policies.
Which
28.
which one are you referring to?
Page
I mean, you've got,
Sorry, in your agenda, I'm just referring to your agenda.
Even page 28. It's in.
Right,
Those are the dates.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Carry on, Rena.
Okay. Yep. So, where was I? Yeah. So we've worked really closely with the TLAs in conveying the need to put some clear deadlines for some of these things, and as such, have tried to work backwards and figure out what things are going to take more time. For example, if you look at the new urban infrastructure policy, that date of 2025 recognises that it does take time to amend bylaws. There is a process there. We can't necessarily rush those things through. But if you look at the policy around dealing with the legacy, that recognises that there is some urgent action that does need to be taken. We're all very clear about that, and as such, TLAs are already doing, undertaking work that will address some of those issues anyway. So that's kind of what I really wanted to get across today, is that we have thought really hard about putting down timeframes and measurables that are actually realistic. But I'm happy to discuss any of those things. The other final point to raise was that I discussed a decision-making matrix which would help decision makers determine whether or not an industrial or commercial activity was low, medium or high risk, and that would then determine what level of regulation under the rules they would fall under. We received a draft a couple of days ago, and we're working on it with TLAs at the moment. It contains things such as whether or not the activity is proximate to a waterway, proximate to a SPZ or a PPZ, the types of contaminants stored on site, emergency procedures. It's quite an extensive list, and what we've tried to do is make it as bespoke to the Hawke's Bay context as possible. But as I say, it is draft, and we are still working with TLAs to tweak it and hone it and make sure that it is appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
A question. Just looking on page 28 at the policies and putting in these timeframes around, which I'm sure everyone thinks is a good improvement. I just wanted to ask, in terms of the Napier City Council's discharge into the ahuriri,
yep,
which of these policies and the timeframes captures their remedial work to improve that? Where does that fall in this?
So are you referring to the Thames Tyne Street discharge?
The whole lot.
The whole lot?
Yeah, the whole lot, but I'm particularly thinking of the storm events when we end up with sewage discharged into the ahuriri, which everyone agrees is urgent and no one likes. So I'm just asking, in these dates, where does that fall?
Yeah, so that's been a really contested topic, and with the TLAs is how we set a target that is both achievable but gives enough time to improve the infrastructure so that that doesn't happen.
Look, I'd make the observation that the issues with the estuary are not to do with their stormwater network, it's their wastewater network.
Right.
So it's not covered by these policies, but their wastewater network is on a consent renewal. And so when it comes up, the broader policy objectives here will be at play in terms of achieving the water outcomes. And so you can expect that as a result of the tank plan change 9, that the consent conditions will be considerably stronger on Napier City's infrastructure, but they've got some physical and practical realities of a 100-year incremental network build that they've got to work through to deal with all the issues. They're actually getting on and trying to address those issues now within their current consent and are not waiting for consent renewal in terms of identifying all the illegal stormwater connections into their wastewater network and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so I realise that the consent process is separate to this. However, this is a big issue for us in terms of managing ahuriri. So as an aside, when does that come back to this table, either by way of an update or giving us some confidence that that matter's being dealt with within a stringent time frame that we all think's,
I understand
reasonable?
that Napier are presenting at the Environment Services Committee I'm not 100% sure of the date this week.
14th of November.
Yeah, and my understanding is that they are going to be giving an update on where they're at with their network.
I think one of the challenges here is that the policy doesn't allow for those discharges. They're illegal discharges effectively. So what is required is that there is not a discharge to the environment of sewage, right? It has to go through the treatment plant and then discharge to sea under normal conditions. So there's sort of no strengthening in policy we can do. We just need to continue to ensure that they are meeting their consent conditions. Unfortunately, they do have a get out of jail in terms of the emergency provisions within the Resource Management Act, which is something we're continuing to look at, which they have been using, which effectively is where you've got a failure in infrastructure and you've got a public health issue to manage. So our ability to prosecute for the current non-compliance effectively is potentially limited, and certainly it's their view that they have the right to make those decisions. But you've effectively got a failure of their infrastructure, and that's something dealt with through compliance and enforcement, not through policy change.
Well, can I just not challenge that, but comment on that, James, and take you to policy 27, source control, and where it says source of stormwater contamination will from the 1st of January 2023 be reduced. And then in the rationale, again, this links to site management plans. Now, my challenge to what you've just said is, where is the plan that is going to meet that particular outcome? And, for example, where would we see the resources applied in their long-term plan to meet that?
Yeah.
So I'm saying, and where Tony is coming from as well, sure, the consenting issue is there, but here we've got a planning issue.
Yes. And
where is the plan?
So, look, that is something which you can address at the NS committee when Napier City come in, but the contaminants, that policy you're referring to, is not designed to capture the Napier City situation, because this is presupposing there are contaminants coming from different activities that need site management plans associated with them.
We've already got evidence that the contamination source is wastewater.
But look, the expectation is that Napier City's wastewater network is not discharging to stormwater. That is the expectation that's within their current consent. So they're failing to meet their current consent conditions, as I think you're aware. So you sort of can't write a policy or a set of rules to require something that's already required.
But you can require an implementation plan, which this says it will do.
So I'd like to think that they'd be on top of this by the time this plan's operative, but that's a reasonably lateral question which we'd need to have a bit of a think about, because you're writing rules for a failure in adhering to the rules, if you get my drift.
So getting back to the point that Tanya raised, and we're going to get a report and have the opportunity to ask questions at the ENS committee in a month's time.
Correct.
Or 2 weeks' time. Can we get a summary report from that and bring it back to the RPC so that everyone here knows what's going on?
Certainly. Yep.
Could come to the...
They could certainly attend or watch on video also the presentation.
So then just going back to Napier City Council and Stormwater, picking up on Councillor Graham's comment, what about the time drain or whatever it's called these days? Where's that going to be dealt with in this?
So they have, the joint working group for the Thames Tyne Street had their catchment management plan signed off by us, Regional Council, a couple of months ago. We worked closely with Napier City Council and that joint working group to really make sure that it was very tight and there was lots of measurables and specific outcomes contained in that. So they will be continuing to adhere to their resource consent conditions, and they've got quite a comprehensive integrated catchment management plan already. So if you look at policy 26 on new urban infrastructure, the comment or the rationale there is that some catchment management plans will already be completed and some not. So that is one that has been already done. Yeah.
It's probably just also worth just rounding out that it was, again, we kind of come to this paper about the process between prior to notification, and that we're required to furnish a copy of the plan change on Napier City Council. So we will no doubt have a significant amount of feedback, I think, on the plan for you to look at and understand, and agree or disagree with.
I think it might be helpful at some point to have a wee session or workshop on the Ahuriri estuary to just consolidate the issues that we understand are affecting it and what plans are dealing with what, so that when we talk about the condition of Ahuriri and what this committee is doing in relation to that, as a group, we're really clear about what plans are dealing with what issues, what are outside that and how they're being dealt with. Because I think probably around the table quite a few of us feel very on the spot with our people about delivering this, and so they don't really care how we slice and dice it, but I want to understand how we're doing that from a holistic perspective. We're looking at the taonga, so we know what the problems are. What are we as a committee doing? What are other processes that are helping with that to resolve those issues? So I think, because otherwise it feels very piecemeal and it's a bit hard to keep a track of it. About the catchment management plans or whatever that are happening, but it'd be just nice to have it focused on that so we can understand it better. Sure.
Okay. Where are we at?
Stormwater. So the question I also have is the risk tool. When do you think we'll have that?
So, yeah, as I say, we received it a couple of days ago. I'm hoping to convene the TLAs in the next week or two to have a near final product.
By the time it comes back in December?
Correct.
So I guess the underlying issue to us around the table here is, how tough are you? Isn't it? We're looking at this, we all know what needs to be done in terms of fixing the infrastructure. We know that's an expensive, could be long-term process to get at it. So hence we have a table with dates where we've tried to squeeze this down.
Yep.
And really the only issue, isn't it, for us to make a judgment about is have you been tough enough? And that's an executive call, I guess, as to, are we satisfied that we're being demanding enough of the territorial authorities who have to deliver the goods in this case? Is that right? So, Mr. Chief Executive, are we being tough enough?
We've got marshmallows, or we've got...
Well, look, I'd take the view of those that participated in the working group, because they, were obviously poured over the information and the data and had the discussions with the TAs. So.
Look, just from my perspective, we've gone from 2 rules in the plan to proposed 4 or 5 rules. So we've definitely added in a lot more kind of restriction and bars to meet. All clear.
All I'm saying is that it's not your job to make friends with your colleagues at the TAs. It's your job to represent the objectives of this council, and are we? We're depending on you, to carry the ball in that regard.
We'll probably get some more information out of the completion of the Section 32 analysis on this area, because I might quick read suggested the Section 32 analysis hasn't yet been remotely completed for the stormwater section in here. So I think there's some more information to be brought to the table. It's obviously something that will be teased out during the pre-consultation. So Napier City Council is one of the parties that needs to be consulted on in pre-consultation.
Good point.
If you could direct staff to ensure that is a particular matter upon which we seek comment from Napier City Council through the pre-consultation phase. And you'll have your own discussions obviously at ENS, but back for this committee, some further discussion with Napier City I think is perfectly acceptable. Perhaps when they provide their pre-consultation feedback to this committee, we could have them along in person and you could cross-examine them and form your own view.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Just another couple of questions. Page 45 of the agenda, stormwater management, 1D, developing and making public by the 1st of January 2023 advice about good stormwater management options. Is that a reasonable time frame? Because all you're doing is developing and making available advice.
I think where that date was based from is that there is a significant amount of information currently available on Regional Council website that has guidance on different forms of stormwater management, for example, low impact design, but it's quite outdated. So I think there was a view that to bring it up to speed and add some more up-to-date international best practice, that was what was guiding that date. We also have a set of waterway guidelines that I have referred to there that are quite out of date, and we really need to bring them up into line to best practice.
Talking about, actually, to be fair, about just over 4 years from now. You expect that to take 4 years? Is that a resourcing issue, or is that why the delay?
I can only say that, I could take that back to the TLAs and say that, perhaps we could bring that down a bit in terms of timing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, on page 48, 5A, required stormwater network discharge management objectives, blah, 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 in a way that recognises affordability to ratepayers. Is that a usual thing to put in a planning document?
Sorry, where are we looking?
5A, the last paragraph. So, there's some objectives there requiring stormwater net to discharges to freshwater through resource content conditions that require, in a way that recognises affordability to ratepayers.
Page 46.
Sorry, 46.
Page 46 of the agenda.
It's a requirement of the RMA. Read the purpose of the RMA, that's what it's required to do.
Certainly nothing unusual about that.
Nothing unusual about that? Right. Page 49 of the agenda.
Why shouldn't it be?
I mean, it just seems odd to me. But never mind. Page 49 of the agenda, under bullet point 7, a program to ensure urban site-specific stormwater management plans are prepared and implemented. Again, have we got a time frame for that to be completed?
I think that we haven't linked that back to one of the policies. We haven't carried the date over, which would be the...
I assume that whatever that is.
Yeah.
That's
So we haven't
fine.
carried the date over. Yeah.
The other one on page 50, bullet point 12, the last last sentence there, and shall not cause any of the following to occur after reasonable mixing. What's reasonable mixing?
It's defined in the RRMP in more detail, and it's
It varies, but doesn't it?
Yeah.
it's the
Reasonable
size
mixture
and
of the
the...
size, the volume of flow, and the
Correct.
distance the water has flowed down a particular
Correct.
thing.
Yep.
So there's a formula for it. Just has to be depends on the size and nature of the
Can't
stream,
recall
the
it off.
cubics, the blah
But
blah blah.
there is a definition somewhere.
Yes, there is.
Yep.
Okay.
Paul, can I just make given that affordability to ratepayers, isn't that really about, the heart of your issue is about choices,
Yeah. Priorities.
priorities
Yep.
that TLs make?
Indeed, it is, Chair.
Should we be making it unaffordable to the ratepayers?
No,
Question.
No, it depends what else the ratepayers are paying for.
that's exactly right.
Baubles, what is it?
It's about choices and priorities.
Baubles.
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 Mr Moore, you said nothing all day.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Did you?
He mihi atu ki a koe.
I thought I saw your hand going. Now, Tony, in terms of the wording
Yep.
of things, can we move on with that? Because we've already lost one councillor and
Yeah.
we want to get somewhere while we've still got the quorum.
So
Someone's
hopefully
leaving soon.
everyone's seen the email that I sent out. It wasn't until this morning, but I would be happy to move the recommendations, subject to a few little tweaks, which are really only to clarify, not to change, I think, what's intended. and I do that on behalf of the tangata whenua members. We had a little talk yesterday just about the drafting. So if I could just explain, in case anyone has any questions, in terms of recommendation 2, it was just to pick up something that was agreed several meetings ago, which is that while we're having discrete provisions put up for approval to the RPC, those non-consensus items, that while we agree to those in principle, it's not actually until we see the whole plan with everything completed that we will be able to approve everything in the plan. So just wanted to pick up the wording that we'd already agreed previously, which is that the RPC adopts in principle and subject to the committee assessing and making a decision on the complete draft plan change and accompanying documents. That's the wording picked up from an earlier resolution, that we agree to these following provisions. So that was the first thing. And the second point there was in relation to 2.1.
Before you go on, you ain't got any issue with that. Carry on, please.
2.1 was simply that in the non-consensus items that we received in version 7 of the plan, policy 16A was one of the non-consensus items. So in terms of our current papers, the recommendation, I believe, intends that we continue with 16A as currently drafted, plus we've got these other bits as well. So just wanted to be doubly clear that 16A is retained in the next draft. I think that's what we all believe is meant, but just making it express in there. And that was all, really.
What's the reference to deleted? What does that relate to?
Deleted?
On this paper?
Can you just scroll up a bit?
No, this one. This paper here. That's what it's referred to.
Deleted.
So this is your original.
Oh, it's a capital I. So that sentence previously started with include rules for managing, and so we've just added in that little bit in red and changed the I for locus. Thank you.
So, Councillor Belford, given you were the mover, I understand, you happy with those tweaks?
What does Tom think?
So,
Tom originally tried to move the
Question,
motion.
I'm sorry.
You willing to move, Tom?
Yeah, assuming that none of this changes what's on page 30.
No, it doesn't change the substance.
Second them.
No, you're moving it.
Thank
You moved it?
I'll move it.
I'll second it.
Okay.
I think there were just a couple of things, Chair, that were brought up this morning that you said you were going to have a look at. One was in that table 7 was just defining what that farming enterprise actually means. I don't know, we'd be in there somewhere. And what the 170 kgs in the table 4 actually meant as well, because at the moment it's just 170 kgs and it's 170 kgs per property or something.
so are you happy that I follow up just direct with you on that, Councillor?
Yeah.
If I could add, in some of our discussion at lunchtime, there was also a question as to whether we could get some information on how many, we're using a 10-hectare cutoff, I think, as the cutoff for reporting stuff, is that right? How many, do we have some sense of the distribution of
Not
sizes, numbers?
Not currently, so you'd like to get that information.
And if we're adding bits for information before we sign off, the two things I would like to see, based on my earlier comments, is around the cost allocation for doing those zones in relation to Papakainga and Marae. Just some further clarity on that. And the other one is I reiterate the point around the health of taonga species for consumption, and understand and getting some information about how do we know that that tuna is edible, health and safe for people to consume. Different to the water quality question. the water quality won't be enough if that tin is not safe to eat, if you see what I mean. So just want to see that look through. So if I could put those two further information items
Can we have a
to the
backup
list.
again, please?
So is the second happy with that?
Can we have the resolution up again? I just have a question about the resolution.
10 hectares is quite a big parcel of land. There'd be lots of paddocks under that in Hiratonga. Lots.
You want to see the resolution, don't you, Tom? Isn't that what I think? Oh, I'm sorry.
The amended one.
Sorry, what was your question?
I just want to see the resolution up.
He wants to see the resolution again.
Are you guys happy with that?
Yes, we are.
You're happy with that, those changes?
We had sufficient discussion. All in favour?
Oh, hang on. We've got debate going on or not? Debate, normal rules of...
No, the mover and second, they've got a right to have something
That's right,
to
let's
say.
hear it.
They have.
Motion's been carried, I was happy with that.
Yeah, no, 4. Oh, that's me.
Are you going to debate it or not? 4, 10. Are you going to debate the resolution, or are you just going to move it?
It's been all morning talking about it.
But I like strong leadership, Twillo, you tell him.
But if you wish to, well, I can't take it back, it's been moved. Oh, I don't care,
How do you mean you can't take it back? You haven't debated it.
It's been done.
As long as we toughen up.
The mover has the first right to speak, I have the second right to speak, and then we go from there.
That's
Yeah,
right,
okay.
exactly. Normal
Do
process.
you have anything to say?
No, I don't. I think it's
Nor
all
do
been
I.
said.
Yeah, I do.
We're so surprised, Neil. Okay, Neil.
So have I,
You can
have I
have
got the
the
call?
soapbox,
Have
I'll
I got
pass
the
it to you.
call, Mr.
Right.
Chair? I do.
Okay.
Thank you. Look, I've got some reservations about this. I appreciate the direction of travel, but you've got to be careful what you wish for here. Taking first the drinking water scenario, where we've got zones of 2 kilometres around drinking water sources, and we've imposed, or seeking to impose, quite stringent land use change or land use obligations. That has, and I go back to the Resource Management Act, which talks about not only social, cultural and environmental impacts, but also economic. So what we've got is significant burden coming onto land users, which may not be intended. Similarly with a requirement to consider land use change, we've got significant burdens coming on board, and it's careful what you wish for. We've got the scenario, for example, in a community in, say, Pakipaki or anywhere else in the region where someone wants to put down a well or put a septic tank in, and it's close to a newly established water supply source. So those folk there...
Geographically challenged, it's nowhere near Pakipaki.
There's a need to, just an example.
So what I'm saying, Mr. Chair, if you follow the logic, is that we are imposing significant burden on landowners. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I'm saying the Resource Management Act requires us to consider not only those important issues in environment, cultural, and etc., but also economic. That's part of that. And are we putting a constraint on that is unintended? And similarly with properties over 10 hectares, you've got the situation where if a farmer were to seek to change land use, it might move from, increasing his herd from 100 to 110, and that triggers an obligation to go for resource consent to do that. It's almost Soviet in its intent. And I'm saying, is that in fact what we intend? Are we putting an obstacle in the way of innovation, change for the better? Could be change for the better. So I'm concerned that imposing a limit without consideration of both inputs and outputs, where does this lead? You know, what are the compliance costs of this? They are my reservations about this. This council is now needing to. That's what plans are enabled to do, is to be compliant with them. What is the cost of compliance in this? So I've just got a little bit of reservation about the direction of travel when you impose unilateral limits, such as 170 kilograms of nitrogen on a block of land, without relevant consideration of the mitigation that's going on. It might be an excellent farmer somewhere wanting to make a land change, has got mitigation in place, and yet this council has determined that we're going to have jurisdiction over, whether increases his stock numbers from 100 to 110. And I'm saying, are we going too far? Are we overdoing it? Should, in fact, we look for another pathway? And that's why I was rather interested to consider that no change in terms of option 4 might be the way to go, looking at other means of addressing the issues. I've got reservations, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I'm sure this is going to come back to us.
So I'd like to speak. Thank you very much, Chair. I have a lot of experience in these zones. I've farmed in a lot of that area. And in 1972, they were talking, when I first went there, they were talking about nitrogen limits in this yellow zone. And so way back there, they kind of recognised that. One thing for sure, we need to protect our water supply. And this is a real chance for us to go into the right direction. We are going to have land change. There are no dairy farms in these zones. There are no big farms with stock in these zones, not one. So we are really talking about horticulture and how we manage horticulture. And I think that this kind of step forward, and the horticulture guys have signed off on this, because they are themselves looking for innovation, ways to go forward. They are themselves looking at ways that to improve their environment. They're conscious about that as anybody. So I want to support them in this endeavour. They've signed off on this, and if they've signed off on this as for the betterment of our community, then I'm happy to do so as well. I don't think it'll constrain anybody. It will change people. Because in that yellow section, of course, is the Gimlet Gravels, which is our premium red wine, grow some not bad Chardonnay as well, region in New Zealand. So it's in all of our interest to protect that, and they've signed off on this as well, and Zane Harding was here this morning. So
They didn't sign off, that's the point.
No, they're not violently objecting to these. Do I understand that right?
They're not challenging anything that we've done here today.
They're not challenging, no. So if it's good, if there's, we've got to trust their judgment on this. So I'm very happy to speak to it and endorse it.
Silence means consent.
It's been voted on and points have been noted.
Voted on, yeah.
So we've got a post-vote speaking list going here, have we?
That's about innovation, isn't it?
You're very liberal, Chair.
Oh, yes, he says. That's a euphemism for something I'll tell you later.
Would you like to put the motion, Chair?
Yeah.
We'll get all.
I think.
Well, we'll do it again so everyone's happy.
No, I've already voted once. I'm not going to vote twice. I'll have a double voting here.
I like this process.
So let's move on.
No, we'll relitigate everything if we do this. No, we've done the job. Let's move on.
In double debate, we might as well double vote.
Well, this will be quadruple voting.
Right. Okay, item 8.
Thank you.
That's what I said.
Thanks, guys. Well done.
Oh, hang on a minute. No, I changed my mind. Item 10, please.
Brexit. This is not Brexit.
We'll jump around because I think we need this to inform. So, Ricky, item 1.
Item 10.
Free Matauranga
Shifting item
presentation.
10 to between 7 and 8.
Oh, so moving it up.
There's no paper, it's a presentation.
It's believed that the presentation will help inform items 8 and 9.
Okay.
Oh, 8, items 8, inform items 8, not 9.
Maori Worldview, we could be here for a few hours.
Could be, hopefully it won't be.
I'm away in 15. Yeah. He's going in 15 minutes.
Short version.
Oh, kia ora tātou. I've just been asked to touch on a few basic concepts, I guess, in terms of the Māori worldview and how that applies to what we do in the regional council, stuff you work on. So just easiest place in my mind to start is with rangi and papa. So whakapapa, genealogy. Whakapapa means put down the layers. It's just to layer things. So starting rangi and papa, we all know the story of Rangi the Sky Father and Papa Tunuku, the Earth Mother, being separated. From those two, there's a whole eons of time before that happened, and that's another story which you won't go into, but there's Te Kori, the great nothingness, and then there was stages of darkness, and from the darkness, when Rangi and Papa were born, their husband and wife, they're clenched together, they get separated by their children, Tāne. They have a number of children, depending on where you're from, how many children are and what they do, up to 70 plus children. The obvious, there's the ones we all know about, Tāne Mahuta, the god of the forests, Tanganor, the god of the oceans, Whawhiri Mātia, the god of winds and weather. I mean, one of those ones, they're not sub-gods, but there's other whole of entities underneath them as well, that each have their own domain in terms of the physical environment. So effectively, my take on that is, as with a lot of Indigenous people, it's a personification of our natural environment. It's living in that place, you try to make sense of it. And Māori have done that by saying these are our ancestors and these are things that we connect to. And out of that, everybody becomes whanaunga. So we're all whānau, we're all part of the same family. And that drives a sense of respect and responsibility to provide for and protect those other parts of the environment, because we're all connected to them, we're all related to each other. And we did that through a system of rules and policies and legal framework, much like we have today in the RMA, Local Government Act and all the other statutes. We had tikanga, so if you break that down, tika is to do things correctly or right. Tikanga just comes from that, it's the right way of doing things. Kaitiakitanga is about sustainability. It's much broader than just guardianship that I think it's been defined as in the RMA. It's much broader than that. It's about, Naito says, mō tātou a mōka uri a muri ake nei, which means for us and for our children after us. So kaitiakitanga is about providing for us today as well as providing for our children in the future. Rāhui is a management tool, if you like. So if something was if a resource is under pressure, we place a rāhui on it and move somewhere else and allow that area to regenerate itself. Tapu and Noa are the yin and yang, if you like. They're the Tapu is more sacred and Noa is more common, so that they balance each other out. And all of those things together work as our policy and legal framework, if you like, and how we manage the natural world and our interaction with it. And in a Māori sense, people are part of that environment. It's not like there's the environment over there and people are over here, and it's our role to control that. We're all part of that same system. As you can't have, it requires us to respect and understand the interaction. The lever we pull over here, so if we go and catch tuna or take power or koda or whatever else, that's going to have an impact on that place. We've got to manage that appropriately and respect the way we do that. Maori, the essential life force, and mana are connected to each other. So Maori, everything has a Maori, which is the power imbued in it from its whakapapa, coming from rangi and papa or your mātua, beyond them. But everything has an essential Maori, and it's not a binary thing. It doesn't have it or not have it. It exists along a continuum. So things can be bad, but you can make them better by doing good things, or things can be made bad by, if we empty all our wastewater into the awa, into the river, then that will degrade the Maori of that place. But we can increase that again by stopping doing that and making it better. And mana is a manifestation in my mind of how strong that Maori is. So the better the quality of that resource, then the stronger its mana is, and that applies to people as well. Our ability to provide for ourselves and for our manuhiri, our guests, is reflected in our mana. So if from where I come from, tuaki cockles are our signature dish, if you like, in Otako, down in Otago Harbour, Otago Peninsula, and if we couldn't provide for those, it would affect our mana significantly. If people come to Otago and they expect tuaki, if we can't provide that, or titi or kōra or other things, then our mana would be diminished. So to manage the way we have to manage that resource to make sure we can still provide that stuff in the future. All those things are connected. An example, I guess, is water, and that's quite topical given we've been talking about tank. So we hear a lot of the time that water is a taonga. Water is also central to our identity as Māori. So you would have probably heard the saying, the whakatauki ki awa, ko au te awa, ko te awa ko au, I am the river and the river is me. Why is a central theme, water is a central theme in tikanga Māori and the Māori, te ao Māori worldview. When you ask someone who they are, you say, ko wai koe, who are you? Who are your waters, literally? Asking them what is the water you belong to. For me, it's depending on who I'm talking to. If it's someone from outside Ngāi Tahu, you'd say, ko waitaki taku awa. If it's someone within Ngāi Tahu, you'd refer to Waikao Iti or Hikararoa, our maunga and awa, or Tākau, our moana. It's a way of identifying who you are, and that comes from that whakapapa. Again, the whakapapa of water, and again, it depends on where you come from. Different iwi have different representations of what this whakapapa is. Some refer to Parawhenua Mea as the maiden of water, or the god of water. Others, Rangi Nui, his tears crying for his wife he's been separated from, is the rain. The mist in the morning, the dew on the ground in the morning is the tears of Papatūnuku crying for her lost husband after they were separated by their children. And then rivers and lakes form the blood, or the arteries of Papatūnuku. And if we create a sickness in those things, if we degrade the quality of those waterways, then Papatūnuku, our Earth Mother, she becomes sick as well. So that's an understanding, I think, of that connection of whakapapa, and that we're all related. If we pull a lever over here, what happens over there the whole thing's going to start to collapse in on itself. And the importance of water, again, is reflected in names. So the Hutt Valley, the Hutt River in Wellington, Te Awa Kairangi, could be the river fed by Rangi, it could be Rangi feeding Papatūnuku with his waters. The Waitaki, from where I come from, Ngāi Tahu, different creation stories. So Aoraki was a son of Rangi from a previous marriage. When Rangi married Papi, Aoraki came down to meet their stepmother, made a mistake in their karakia and couldn't go home. So he cries constantly for his lost father, and those tears form the Waitaki River. And Waitaki is Ngāi Tahu dialect for Waitangi, or crying waters. So that's replicated across the country, and the tangata whenua could explain the meaning behind the various rivers and awa roto around here. So to place that into a statutory framework, why do we need to worry about these things? One, to me it makes sense, but obviously Parliament's agreed with that as well, and they've passed certain things in the RMA that say we've got to take into account these things, recognise and provide for. As a matter of national importance, the relationship of Māori and their culture, te mea. Section 7 recognises the need to have particular regard to kaitiakitanga, and in Section 8, take into account the principles of the treaty. So those are all reasons why this is important, and why, I guess, part of the reason we're sitting here having this discussion and as the RPC, as part of giving effect to these things. There's a whole lot of other sections in the RMA, Section 33 and 34, around transfer of powers, delegation of the Council's ability to delegate its power to other committees and groups. Hasn't really happened anywhere other than Taupo District done a little bit around Māori land and continue around Māori land, but those provisions haven't largely been used for lots of reasons. The recent changes to the RMA brought in Section 58M into 58U, mana whakahono, the partnership agreements between councils and iwi. So those are new provisions, and there's some places where that's being worked through at the moment. There's provisions around regional planning, Schedule 1 around the preparation of plans, which we're probably reasonably familiar with in terms of where we're going through for tanks. So that process of pre-notification, all that stuff is set out in Schedule 1. There's a whole lot of other stuff which I won't get into too much here. The National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management, 2014, first introduced the concept of te mano te wai, and that was strengthened in 2017, those changes to what's stated up there. And the council has to go through a process of changing, making and changing those statements and plans to recognise te mano te wai. So go back to that concept of mana again, and mana and Maori. Te mana o te wai is recognising the importance of the quality and quantity of those water bodies, making sure the mana of those things is protected. We've got to actually physically, we've got to change our plans and review our plans to make sure that they're doing that. And there's some other text below that which I haven't included, but it's about a conversation with the community, I think, about what are the values and what are the aspirations they have for their water bodies, and how do we reflect that in our plan making. There's a whole lot of other statutes that Parliament in its wisdom has decided to incorporate reference to Te Ao Māori or the treaty or other things, local government acts, the RPC Act that creates this committee. HASNO reflects that Part 2 stuff for 6E, 7A from RMA. Provisions is reflected in the HASNO Act, Conservation Act, required to give effect to the Treaty of Waitangi, probably the strongest reference to the treaty in terms of legislation at the moment. Other stuff like the Wildlife Act, State and Enterprises. Canterbury Earthquake Response and Recovery Act. Under that Act, Ngāi has the right to appoint 2 councillors to Environment Canterbury. That provision expires in October next year at the elections. Environment Canterbury has just, I think today, announced that they are progressing a local bill to embed those provisions into the Canterbury situation. So Ngāi, if that bill passes, Ngāi will, as of right, have the right to continue to appoint 2 councillors to Environment Canterbury moving forward beyond the elections next year.
Very sensible.
They think so.
I agree with them.
Yeah. So I mean, for them, it's without getting into detail, it's worked quite well for the council, and they see the value in that, so they want to carry that forward. So they're working in partnership with Ngāi to progress that at the moment. And that bill will be introduced shortly, hopefully.
Could you just repeat that, Ricky? How many tangata whenua for councillors did you say?
2. So Ngāi appoints as of right 2 councillors to the
council.
Environment Canterbury. Yeah. So they have the same status as the elected members of Environment Canterbury.
We got very close to having 2 elected Māori councils here, very similar.
We got very close.
Difference being with there is that they're not elected at large, so they are appointed by Te Reinga Ngāi. They won't be, they're not Māori councillors.
Well, they're one iwi, aren't they?
Wards.
So it's easier for them.
Well, yeah, but then, I mean, it doesn't, there's a lot of non-Ngāi Tahu population in Canterbury. Which won't.
There's a lot of non-kahungungu here or non-tangata whenua here in Hawke's Bay.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of issue with the Māori wards. There's a lot of questions around that because it becomes representative of Māoridom rather than tangata whenua. So this is a response to a tangata whenua response, I guess.
Yeah, that's an interesting intellectual argument, that.
Which is the reason a number of places have rejected the idea of Māori ward. So Ngāi Tahu Otago rejected the idea of having Māori seats for that very reason. They didn't want their mana, I suppose, being subjected to input from other iwi when they're not tangata whenua, particularly at a regional council level, less so than a territorial account, TLA level. At a regional council where you're talking about environmental stuff, it's an Article 2 issue, which is about tangata whenua.
But on the other side of it, though, I've got quite a few friends in Christchurch, middle-class white people, who in years gone by would have thought nothing of an opinion from Ngāi Tahu. But over the last 10 years, they see Ngāi Tahu as leading all of these debates in water and so on, and they have become the trusted voice above the regional council, the Christchurch City Council. So they want to know what the councils think. What's Ngāi Tahu think? When they hear that, that's what they take notice of. So I mean, I think they'll get a fabulous support from the local community on that. Just because of that, they've led the intellectual arguments on so many issues and led them so well. They've been superb.
In my personal experience, that's been, and living through that shift from being pre-settlement to post-settlement with a Ngāi Tahu, the environment's totally changed.
They've changed it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, when we first settled, they were burning down the marae, and Dunedin was burnt down. Our law offices were burnt down in Dunedin because they were the only physical symbol of Ngāi Tahu effectively on that landscape.
Oh, yeah.
But that's all shifted to now, like you're saying, it's what do they think, and we can support them. And that's great. No, it's amazing shift in the attitude, I think, across Te Waipounami, not just within Christchurch. But Christchurch is an interesting.
Yeah, but it's been led by Ngāi Tahu.
Yep.
No question about that.
How long since Ngāi Tahu's settlement?
Settlement, about
20 years.
30 years.
20 years?
isn't it? Yeah, 20 years. 20 years in a disaster to be heralded as good.
No, I was
Good
at the law
advice.
firm when they passed it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's all sorts. I mean, if you look at our balance sheet, it's very strong, and we can probably thank the earthquake for some of that. And I think the earthquake actually gave Ngāi Tahu and Christchurch the opportunity to reinvent itself. So Ngāi Tahu had very little physical manifestation of our tikanga or our culture on the Christchurch landscape, and that's totally changed through the earthquake response and Recovery Act stuff. Ngāi Tahu has been a partner alongside the council and all of that, and with the government as well. And a lot of the redesign stuff has been along. We've been a key input into that, partly because we own whole of the land, but also the redevelopment of the city and the public areas have been done in partnership with Ngāi Tahu, and that's been very well received, I think, in terms of how that's happened.
But the other part of it, when the people were looking for land, the developers came in and started scalping everybody. They were asking extraordinary prices. Ngāi Tahu came in and said, well, that's unfair. We'll put some land on the market. We've got a profit, but not like that. And they crashed the market on land prices. That's what they did.
Yeah. And I mean, that's fascinating. That whole, it's quite fascinating how, I mean, we've grown a lot through that process as well, in terms of as an iwi.
Wonderful leadership. Right?
We lack that leadership in Hawke's Bay.
Well, we haven't seen it.
So that model is,
Circumstances, really.
there's been a lot, you would have heard a lot of talk about Māori rights and interest in freshwater and what is it we're trying to achieve. Ngā Matauranga ki te Wai is a model that Billy and I were involved in putting together for the Freshwater Iwi Leaders Group in about 2012. It's far from perfect, but it's intended to represent what are we trying to achieve. Objectives in improving water quality, realising the value of water, and enduring relationships. So as iwi, a lot of the iwi around the place feel like their connection to their waterways has been broken, or they've been excluded from that connection. So it wasn't, there's a lot of discussion around ownership and all those sort of things. Ownership is, to me, a bit of a rabbit hole you can go down and you end up in a different place than where you necessarily want to be. But it's around, those four things: governance, wanting to be involved in making decision making. In the Waikato River, they talk about mana whakahaere and mana te awa. So those things being recognising our traditional mana by being able to be part of the decision-making process. That's what that's about, both at a regional and a central government level. Limit setting, which we're donkey deep in with Tank, making sure those limits, so the in-stream limit there is set at a place that provides for our aspirations and our values. So mahinga kai, the health and well-being of those waterways, that limits are set in a way that reflects those things. Allocation, iwi want to be part of the economy as well. They want to be able to share in the benefits of use of water. Once we've set the limits in the appropriate place, then whatever's left over, let's have a discussion around how we equitably access that. And the transition phase is how do you get from where we are now into a place where we're all benefiting equally or equitably. So equitable allocation was those things along the bottom there. Mana te Wai, the treaty is the backbone of all this discussion. Iwi and Hapu are the kaitiakitanga of their own waterways, and they exercise mana motohaki. So that's saying the tangata whenua for here should have a say in this waterways. It's not for Ngāi Tahu to come to Hawke's Bay and start telling you what to do or how to do it. The conversation needs to be the tangata whenua from here. And likewise, we don't expect people to be
From where? From all of Hawke's Bay?
Well, the iwi that have mana over those places. The Tank iwi, talk to them about that. Pahuwira's Moaka space, to talk to them. It's not about saying...
But that's not what we do.
No, that's what that model is suggesting, is that you should be doing.
I love your model.
I think that's,
What you're saying here is completely contradictory to the service that this committee paid to Central Hawke's Bay, with not allowing the phase-in over time to allow existing users to adjust.
Yep. Well, I think I'm not in a position to argue either way, but I acknowledge your point.
Perhaps we can bring that back at the next meeting then, Chair.
Well, this brings back a whole lot of things next meeting. If we were to accept it, it is just one point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it was just us really trying to articulate what our aspirations were, and these other different areas got different aspirations. They agree with some of this, they don't agree with it all. We've got a totally different way of thinking about things. So when we first punted up to Manautawai as a concept that could have some national application, Ministry of the Environment came back and said, oh, they want to talk about Te Maori o Te Wai, so you can't have Te Mana o Te Wai. I'm like, well, they're the same thing. You're just being pedantic and splitting hairs over a word. And a lot of this is about language. And I think, listening to conversations around this table today, sometimes we got a little bit confused about language and we're using different terminology for the same thing, but actually we a lot of times I think meant the same thing.
Yeah, we do that. Can we have a copy of your...
Yeah, I can.
Oh, we got
Been emailed to you.
It was on that email, it was forwarded on us.
It's changed slightly, so obviously an updated version, but yeah, absolutely. So the three waters in the valley of Matauranga Maori, this is just another example really. So the Three Waters Review, I'm sure you're all familiar with. Nanaia Mahuta, as Minister of Local Government, kicked that off. Exploring issues around drinking waste and stormwater. We've got a massive problem coming down the pipe, literally, for New Zealand in terms of capacity and capability around fixing the lack of investment in our infrastructure around those things. There's some ongoing risks to the human health and the environment. From a Māori perspective, the impact of those failing systems on water quality and quantity. Te Mana o Te Wai, the mana of those waterways is a big issue. The other flip side of that is the impact of those system failures on Māori communities. So if you places like Little Waihi, where they have no water treatment, they have no sewage treatment, in a Māori community, well, it is a Māori community, and how can the Three Waters Review, there's a whole lot, we talked earlier today about access of marae and papakainga to get water. Motu Wairaka down in Riversdale, so there's a marae there, they can't have hui because there's not enough water. They can't afford to truck it in because trucks getting out there is expensive, so they just can't have hui on their marae. We went there for a hui and they're like, well, you can't have a shower because there's not enough water in the rain tank sort of thing. But there's a community right next door which has sufficient water, so how do we connect those things together and make those things better, is really what this is, from a Māori perspective.
Like we did at Bridge Pa.
Yep.
We had to connect.
Yep. And there's examples that are all over the place. So in Tūranga and Gisborne, where there's a papakainga and a marae where the water's taken from behind there, from their catchment, piped straight past them, and they're not able to connect to that without paying an exorbitant fee. But their water is effectively supplying the township. And just connecting those things up, I think. In terms of how Matauranga Māori might apply to that, so Minister Mahu's come out saying she's got quite strong aspirations for utilising Matauranga Māori and addressing some of these challenges. So what is Matauranga Māori? It's about Māori knowledge and understanding. It's not about something that was, a lot of the time it's referred to as traditional knowledge. I think that, to me, that's a distraction. It's not about saying this is what we believed in 1840 or sometime in the past. It's about what we've taking that and adding all the other stuff we've done in between and bringing stuff from Western science and everywhere else, utilising the understanding of both of those worlds and then bring that together for a better understanding of everything. That idea that something is fixed in time doesn't work for anybody. I think the idea that we're constantly developing, evolving, expanding applies to all cultures and all world views. So we need to do that and make sure that that stuff's carried forward. Some examples. Naito again, we did a lot of our property subdivisions. We started out, it was just we were very good at developing property, but it was a very Pākehā way of thinking about it, to be honest. We'd bring the scrapers in, flatten something, build a whole lot of houses on it and walk away and sell them to someone else. Iwi sort of said, well, that doesn't necessarily line up with our value set. We need to be thinking more about how do we do this holistically, how do we make sure our stormwater treatment, the plantings reflecting our culture and our tikanga. So we've got into using swales and wetlands to stretch stormwater on site within those subdivisions. As an example of that, eco-sourcing traditional species, so we weren't doing the Christchurch thing and planting oak trees and elm trees and whatever all over the place. Using native species, we didn't have to water them constantly, so we reduced our water. water impacts, and the result being a restoration of our Indigenous ecosystems in those places. And that extends to the naming of those sort of things. I think we started out calling them Wigram Skies because it was at Wigram and some clever person that will call it Wigram Skies, to moving to using traditional names for what those places were and connecting that back to those traditional thoughts as well. And that extends into the monitoring and the monitoring techniques as well. So a lot of you probably would have heard of Gail Teeper's work in the Cultural Health Index, which is basically saying these are the things we would have traditionally measured to, monitor the health of our environment. You guys, in terms of the Regional Council and Otago, are using these methods. Let's compare them. And what it actually proved was you can use the stuff that we've used traditionally as giving you the same answer as all your expensive modern monitoring is doing. So it validated, I guess, and the Cultural Health Index came out of our treaty settlement back in '97 as a requirement. But the use of those things, so Dr. Enirudu from Te Aitanga Mahaki up the road here has done a similar thing with the Maori compass. But I think this goes to the heart of Matauranga Māori. It's not about saying you're right or you're wrong. It's just, can we just use stuff we've already got rather than reinventing the wheel and saying we need to go out and get a scientist to come and tell us this stuff's right. And we've already got a model out here that says we can use that. So let's just, maybe blend some of those things when we need to, but let's just use the stuff that's already there as well. As government, you would have seen Gavin's email recently about the essential freshwater launch that Minister Parker held in Wellington a few weeks ago. Similar things, so they want to work in partnership with Māori, they want to be the outcomes they're looking for, halting the decline, so stopping water quality getting any worse. Central government's indicating it wants to be much more active in terms of involvement in freshwater management. We've got the NPS and the NES signalled changes to the RMA. They want to invest in change. They signal clearly their partnership with Māori and stakeholders. And the other part of that is a shared interest in freshwater, so that's the government saying, the previous government had this, I don't know how long we worked on it for, a long time, this engagement between the Freshwater Iwi Leaders Group and ministers directly. This government saying, that was great, didn't get us anywhere, let's broaden that conversation. So they've acknowledged that, Te Mana Te Wai is a critical issue, how do we protect those things and manage that? Acknowledging Māori have rights interest in freshwater, want to address those allocation of water and discharges as an issue, achieving better economic, environmental, cultural and social outcomes. So that's their baseline. And I've been appointed to Kahui Waimāori, which is there's two groups, there's the Freshwater Leaders Group and the Kahui Waimāori. So we're just starting that process now about working through some of that. But I think the message is that, they want to see things change on the ground. And they're prepared, I think, to be quite interventionist in doing that. If we can get in front of that game and be proactive, we'd be better set up to address that. Just finally, I think my experience with regional councils in a number of places around the country, and not just councils, but people in general, that this is the perception that Māori values are over here and Pākehā values are over here. And again, a lot of that comes down to language. So when we talk about rangi and papa, and that cycle of water, it's the same cycle. Everyone knows that water flows down the river and then evaporates and goes back into clouds and comes and rains and up the mountains again. And that flow, we just describe it in different words. We actually mean the same thing. And the reality, I think, is something more closer to that, where there's a big overlap in the middle, but we get distracted by those little bits around the outside by thinking we're quite different when there's a lot in the middle that we share in common. And if we can get to that point, then we can make progress. But again, in my experience, rather than being in this place, getting to there, we've got to change the way we talk about stuff, I guess. And it's actually, you can, with all respect to my lawyer friends and colleagues, I'm a lawyer too, I'm sort of dishing myself here, but we can stick to the letter of the law and we can try and argue this is what the RMA said, we've got to follow that rule, or we can take it in the spirit of what I think it was meant. If you talk to the people who wrote the RMA, the Shane Jones, Laws Lawsons, Maui Solomons, when they put those provisions in the RMA, the 6E, 7A, Section A stuff, 8 stuff, I think the intention was it was going to be a dramatic shift in where we got to, and how Māori values were were incorporated into environmental planning. And from an iwi perspective, there's a lot of frustration, I suppose, that it hasn't achieved what iwi wanted it to. And that's, I mean, cuts both ways. Our expectations may have been too high, and the expectation of what changed may have not been enough. So it's probably somewhere in the middle, a bit like that. There's a bit in the middle we've got to get to, that sweet spot, I suppose, around finding those common grounds and those common values. And if we can start with that, then the more difficult stuff becomes easy to deal with. So that's pretty much it, really.
Any questions?
Just a statement about Rangi Papa. I recall about 10 years ago I was in Wellington Squash Club having a beer with a highly intelligent doctor, a staunch Catholic, and talking about Rangi Papa, and he said, you know, all aside, you don't really believe all that Maori bullshit, do you? And I said, well, you know that joker that was on the cross, pinned on there 3 days and then was stabbed? You don't really believe he walked around after all that, do you?
That's harsh on the Catholics, but true.
I'm a Catholic.
Yeah, Ricky, I'd like to thanks for that. I really enjoyed that, and I 100% agree with you that everybody in this room, whether Māori or Pākehā, want the same thing. We want clean rivers, clean lakes, and clean estuaries, and stop silting up our sea and ocean. And it's just how we get there and how fast we get there without destroying our economy. That's the way, you know, that's, I think, the objective of everyone. We don't want to lose jobs or stop job creation, but we do want to stop the degradation of our rivers. And over the last, and Toro's always saying we failed. He always says we failed. He never says we generically, him and I. He always just says I fail. You know, we are failing. And so we've probably got to step the ante up. As a community, we're failing. We've got to step the ante up and do this together. And the other thing I'd like to reflect on too, on your thing, that it always interests me how Māori and Pākehā look with different lenses. And learning how, and we always do, and even today I did look with a different lens. So you just can't help that. It is having been able to work it out when you make a mistake together. That's the essential thing as I see it, because you're always going to look at things differently. That's all there is to it.
So, I think one of the lessons is that we need to learn from our mistakes. That's the only way we can learn. If we have made a mistake in terms of Waipukaro, then maybe we need to relook at it. I don't know.
Thank you. We'll take you up on that.
I think you're right though, Toro, and that's something, to me, that's at the heart of Te Ao Māori. We did make mistakes, and I think we need to acknowledge that. People always come to me and say, well, you killed all the Moa. Yeah, we did kill all the Moa.
You did. Actually, you did.
That's an historical fact. But we learned from that and decided, well, we can't keep on doing that because we made a big effort up there.
I can't even
We've
keep
got to change the way we do things.
Couldn't keep it going.
Yeah, but I mean, that's probably what reason we ended up in New Zealand. We're going to land somewhere else.
But we've all done that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
That's right, but I think we need to.
There's not one country on the planet that hasn't
2030.
done something similar.
I know, that's right.
We're all guilty of that. It's only a matter of time.
But it's how we respond to that, I think, is the important thing, and learning to be different.
I agree that we all got to learn to be different as well. But this point and blame and say, "Oh, you did this," it's just bullshit.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
I mean, it's just people go on about Maori belief system. Well, wasn't that long ago my ancestors were burning witches, thinking of getting rid of witches this way. And it wasn't that long ago people believed the earth was flat. We've still got some around here. So we've all got all these issues. Listen.
You mean it, isn't it?
God.
I knew you were lot burnt witches.
Yeah, no, that's right. But the only thing I think the slivers around the edge of your Venn diagram is actually narrower than what we think. And because we focus on the differences, and they're not, in my view, not necessarily different, though the language and the words we use and the sequence do, I think in reality it's actually much closer. We look for the differences, that's all we see. We don't look for the similarities.
Yeah.
And they blind us on occasion. Excellent presentation, that's great.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I ask going through the chair? Thank you. Can I ask
He's
what
only
what
by
you do?
himself, isn't he? No
Tab-
one's sitting close to me.
Neil Nofri.
Oh, well
Neil, no,
done,
mate.
Mike. That's a good photo.
You're talking on behalf of Bucky
Just
anyway, so-
returning to
You
your
haven't got a bright lights over, is it?
returning to your knowledge of the Resource Management Act and the purpose of this committee around plans, etc. Can you give me a feel for a couple of things? One is the extent of consultation, and perhaps using the current tank process as an example of that. And the other one too is iwi and hapu planning documents, their definition, application. Have we used any in our current situation? So 2 questions.
I think to me that goes, there's a legal requirement to do certain things, and I think if we stick to that, you get to a certain point, or if you take it, the intent of what that's to do is to engage people, then if we can do that, if we just focus on the legal construct of what we have to do, then you end up in a certain point. But if you take a much broader thought about, well, you know, we've got to do this, but if we engage as many people as we can, the best we can, then we'll end up in a better place. And the RMA is, you know, as with any piece of legislation, comes down to interpretation. And there's certain things that you said, you know, you have to do this and you have to talk to the authorities at this point and this point. And yeah, we need to do that, but if we can put that in the context of, well, let's have a conversation, because we're all, as you know, Rex has acknowledged, we're all on the same page, we're all trying to do the same thing. Then we hopefully end up in a better place. It's not just the council's problem, it's iwi's problem as well. We've got to be, we as in Tangata Whenua, and not just here, across the country, I think, have to be better at engaging in this process as well. It's easy to sit outside and throw rocks at stuff. It's much more difficult to sit at a table like this and be decision makers. It's a totally different mindset. And I think for most Tangata Whenua that I've worked with, they've been excluded, so they sit on the outside and they throw rocks at stuff. Don't like that, no, you can't do this. When you put them in that position and say, well, you've actually got to make a decision around this, and if you close that, then if you close that river off, the freezing works closed, you're unemployed, the community will fade away because you go somewhere else to find work, so the school will close, the dairy will close, all that other stuff, and that's a different conversation. So we need to engage in that conversation. I'm not saying it's right, we should just keep putting patu in the river or allow the freezing works to do whatever it likes, but we've got to change the mindset of the way we think about those things, and that applies to Tangata Whenua as well. I think the council, you know, it's coming together. The council's got to move from where we're over here saying, oh, you know, I'm not saying this council, but economy's the number one driver here. We want a better standard of living. Well, that can't be at all costs. You've got to come to a point where there's somewhere in the middle. And I think that's what frustrates me about the RMA and the way it's applied sometimes is there's a strict leader of the law that says do these things, and we'll just do those things. But if we can have a conversation collectively, and Māori got to step into Tangata Whenua got to step up to that game as well, be more engaged in the process and actually inform ourselves around what the consequences of A and B happening are, then we're in a better place. Which brings you to iwi management plans, and I think iwi and hapu management plans, again, the definition of the RMA, which is not hugely helpful, says, you know, a planning document recognised by the iwi authority, whatever the exact wording is, which could be a piece of paper saying, this is who we are, here's our address, come and talk to us. Or you might have something like Noto who has, we're in version 3, I think, in Otago, possibly version 4 in Southland, which are pretty comprehensive. They look like an RMP from the council, and they're modelled on that, and they're quite comprehensive. But even that, again, it's a statement in time. You know, when I was involved in the Kaitau Ki Otago one back in 95, 96, 97, which we thought was really great, and then you look back at it now and you sort of cringe and think, shit, we didn't do that well. But if it does anything, it engages Tangata Whenua in that conversation. We've actually got to start thinking about these things beyond, you know, we don't want stuff in our river. No one wants stuff in the river, but how do you achieve that? And that's the conversation I think iwi management plans engage people into. And work, we spent hundreds of thousands on our version 2. It was back in 95, 97. It was our second version of that. And we spent, probably a couple of $100K on that. And we did a lot of the work ourselves, while, all students like me and others helping out. They're good, but they're of varying quality and they're of varying use. And I think both sides need to understand that. I don't think council can pick it up and say, oh, here we go, this is what the iwi said, we'll just follow that pathway. You've got to go and truth that and actually sit down with them and say, well, you guys said this, is this still correct? Or where's your thinking at? Is it shifted beyond this? Have you thought about stuff more? And a lot of times, even amongst the iwi, I know some of our hapu within Naito, we brought in consultants to write them for us, which to me doesn't make sense. How can you have a consultant writing an iwi management plan if they're not from there? So they just come and talk to you and say, oh yeah, they said that, write that down. The real benefit of them is that conversation, I think, and then the discussions that happen around the process of getting from not having something to having a document is the real richness of that. So the conversations with the kaumātua, our paua and taua, about those things, those stories that come out of that otherwise don't get talked about often enough. So the document is an important resource at the end of the day, but it's not the only thing. And I think if we can encourage those things, they've got to be living. They can't just be, they should be reviewed. Regional plans are reviewed every 10 years. They should be management plans probably.
Well, they'd be like the farming environmental plans.
Yep.
I view them the same way. But I think Hawke's Bay, we have a unique proposition in regards to treaty settlement. 10 years ago, there was only one iwi authority. Now, and the other unique thing about settlement in this part of the region is Ngāi Tahu and the top of the north, top of the south, were the ones that settled. Here we've got Ngāti Kainganiwi settled on the Fisheries Settlement Act, and the other 7 are hapu, whenua settlements. Yeah. So we have a different environment. But the other thing about we mean and talk the same thing, we don't actually start at the same place. We're not standing on the same ground. We're not level because we've been disenfranchised from our land. So we might talk the same things, but the application comes from very distinctive different views. And to afford the opportunity for us as an RPC to discuss those would go a long way in progressing the actual governance work of this committee. So I know as a tangata whenua member, I can't help but consider the inequities and try to figure out a strategy to get us on a semi-level area in regards to the tank plan change. It's something as simple as that. So I would welcome the opportunity, and we were going to have a meeting, a workshop on the terms of reference to get some agreement on how we thought about things. I've just read reading the review. And so this kind of conversation we should have. It was postponed because of the tangi, but I would like to see it come front and centre that we afford the time to discuss those things, because it just makes governance smoother to do that. So, kia ora.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you, Ricky.
Yeah, thank you, Ricky. I think this is a good start to actually coming together of minds, and maybe we continue this in a wānanga or something.
Workshop.
We could call it a workshop process or whatever, but just to go through maybe, because I pick up on your point about how we tend to focus on power rather than, people who want to obstruct body participation, they focus on power rather than collaborative outcomes. And so we can move from that space. I think we can achieve quite a lot. So thank you very much, Ricky, and we'll move on because got a few more agenda items. So we go back to the tank. Oh, someone move that report be received. Thank you.
I'll move.
Thank you. I'll second that. All in favour?
Aye.
Okay. We're back to item 8.
Question, Chair.
Sorry.
Have a question?
Yes.
Of the item. Paragraph 11, the council is required to provide adequate time and opportunity for iwi authorities to consider the draft plan change. Does the council have any idea what is an adequate time and opportunity?
We've lost our quorum.
Rick's just back. Quorum's back.
Yeah, we might have to have comfort, Scott.
It's only an information item.
Which one are we
Comfort
doing?
stop,
Item-
did you say?
Yeah, I thought so.
Item 8 is only a... Yeah, we'll have a comfort
As a
stop.
coach here, no power. Weak bladders people, older people.
Nobody leave the building.
Yeah, that's right. No, please don't go shopping.
And they can grab a cup of tea. You could grab a cup of tea and bring it back.
We are losing Corona at 3:30, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'll have to be a quick cup of tea if we want to get any more.
You have to bring it back.
Go with Corona.
Still to it. Multitask.
Well, let's put it this way. Those who wish to go and whatever, do so. We'll continue.
Let's have organised chaos.
Yes.
We've only got the performance review.
Haven't got long, Jack.
Yeah, the performance review we need to do.
Shouldn't we just do it?
we'll just get
then
Yeah.
start.
Let's get on.
Yeah, do the performance review.
Pulling on papers now.
We've got that number 8 first, huh?
This is information only.
Oh,
it
sorry.
doesn't require a decision.
You still got to do 8, because I thought you talked to it earlier on.
It's information only,
Who's
it
in
doesn't
charge?
require a decision.
Did, where did you, I did item 7.
The 19% staff.
Sorry.
Okay.
Set you wrong.
And clear that is this report is for information only, decision making provisions do not apply.
I haven't got yellow on. Sorry.
Hoi hoi.
Order, please.
Order!
Very important person here.
Bring the meeting to order.
More than happy to take item 8 as read, but just to remind you that this is a further outline that touches on, or follows up from an earlier paper back in March to this committee. It does focus on the, particularly the necessary steps just prior to notification of the plan change or any regional plan change that we may do. So it just does touch on the consultation requirements with particular parties prior to notification, and what Councillor Bailey has touched on, a new requirement that came through in RMA amendments last year around sharing a copy of the relevant draft, whatever that is, with iwi authorities and inviting their feedback. So in response to Councillor Bailey's question, which was, does the council have any view on what a reasonable timeframe is? It's probably more leaning towards a timeframe of weeks, not months, for iwi authority feedback on a draft plan change or draft plan. That's based on some feedback that we have had from MFE officials, and also a real example from Hastings District Council's recent streamlined plan process where the Minister had directed some specific timeframes and dates for things to occur, and the seeking of comments from iwi authorities on the then draft plan change for Hastings was something like 3 weeks.
I'm
Three-week
sorry.
period.
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit flabbergasted by that. If you look at the list of people that we have to consult, the groups that we have to consult with, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them aren't members of this committee, so would never have seen a copy of the draft plan change. And you're suggesting that they need to go through and sufficient consultation is a matter of weeks with these particular groups.
I can be clear, there are 2 elements here. One is mandatory consultation with territorial local authorities, ministers and tangata whenua through iwi authorities. And in this paper, there are, as I see it, according to records from Te Kahui Mangai, there are 9 iwi authorities with interests in the tank catchment area.
Yep.
We have to, prior to notification of the tank plan change, we have to consult with all of those parties.
Yep.
There is the additional, if I can finish, there is the additional requirement now that we also have to furnish a copy of the draft plan change on iwi authority and seek their feedback. That doesn't necessarily have to be face-to-face.
No, but what I'm asking is you're suggesting to me that you're going to give them a matter of weeks to do that, to give them a copy of the draft plan change, and then to seek their to expect their feedback back within a matter of weeks.
That's what he said.
It's within this committee's mandate to oversee what that consultation on a draft plan change looks like? It could be weeks,
I'd
it
note
could be longer.
some of these entities were represented in the Treaty Partners Group or Mana Whenua Group for the tank plan change, so quite a lot of participation all the way through, including obviously representation around this table. So there's a judgment call about, given all the steps to get to this point, how much further time we're going to provide. But we're going to run into Christmas soon too, so.
Well, I'm Christmas mishmash. At the end of the day, if we're required to expect someone to give us feedback on a draft plan change document, I don't think it's unreasonable to give them a adequate time and opportunity to give us feedback. Now, I would suggest that if you dump something like Plan Change 9 on someone and then ask them to give you adequate that's an adequate time and opportunity, a couple of weeks to go through that plan change, have a grasp of what's happening, and then to give you feedback on it, I would suggest that that's probably not adequate time and opportunity.
So I think the essential question here, which James is saying, and I put it slightly differently, is that you could say it's inadequate on the presumption that they had no knowledge. So the feedback information loop comes from the presumption of how much knowledge and how familiar they are with the material. So if you have a high level of knowledge, it could be a matter of a couple of days if you really knew your stuff. If not, something in between. So before we make a big think about it, what is the assumption about the level of knowledge people have of these issues?
Because there's three, there'll be four of them in there that I can think of, but that will have a reasonable knowledge of it, because three of those groups sit around this table here, and Ngāti Kaununu I know has been involved with the tank process, so that shouldn't be that challenging. But I'm not sure about the other five.
So I think if I could just add one thing here. I mean, I think Kevin's defence. I mean, your question was, what is that process? And I think what Gavin described to you is what is practice around the place, and in terms of how has this been enacted. And I think, going to Ricky's presentation, what are we going to do is another matter, and how are we going to do this? And in many respects, we will be looking for guidance from around this table, particularly from Tangata Whenua, around what the shape of that process looks like.
I just want it noted, because we discussed this yesterday, Te Kāhui Māngai they don't utilise a robust process of what is, or the definition of, and I just given a brief outline of the dynamics of this settlement area. I don't want us to be to exclude anybody. And I remember in the Board of Inquiry taking to task Te Kāhui Māngai because of the process by which they deemed authorities. And they don't have criteria. They don't cross-reference or check. If you've been on there, you stay on there. So it doesn't take into account anything about the new landscape. So I'd like it noted that I don't think it's a reliable source. It's a source on its own, but it's not a reliable source, and it would go a long way if we could determine what that criteria is for us, given the quite distinct differences of the landscape, albeit iwi authorities. So is it legislated statute authorities? Is it specific legislation that requires them, to qualify? But those are the things that we need to consider. So whilst there's these groups here, I would actually say there'd be quite a few more to consider.
Can you give us some examples as to who they might be, and based on what?
Well, if you ever look up at that map there, in that dark area, there's all the Ōwhāko Trust, Awarua, Hinemanu, heaps of them. They own a lot of land up there, and they...
So look, there's hundreds of trusts, Māori trusts, and this is pre-consultation. There's still the formal notification, full opportunity for people to be involved.
Absolutely.
The pre-consultation in the Act is premised on effectively large natural groupings. So it's
Just have Councillor Barker's question answered, because that'll help this. We've got 9 listed there, but it's broader than that, I know, if you take into account the tank group itself. So what was the representation
On the
around
tank
tank? 2, our own Māori committee, and 3, the RPC. So there are 3 forum where people have been informed and have significant knowledge. So can you just tell us how broad this is now? That I think that's Councillor Barker's question is the most relevant one. Can we have an answer?
Well, as paragraph 8.3 of this report says, I have gone to Te Kahui Mangai, Te Puni Kokori's crown record of iwi authorities across the country. So I personally think that is a pretty authoritative record of iwi authorities for RMA purposes and other purposes.
That's fine.
And how that plays out in Hawke's Bay.
That's fine. So
that's my starting point.
Of those 9, how many have got significant knowledge and understanding of the tank process?
I'd say a lot.
Well, I agree with you, but can we have it from Gavin?
Hiratonga Tamatea Settlement Trust per se.
Is there anyone not?
Has a table around seats at this table, but they haven't been a member of the tank group. Mana Hariri Trust was invited to the tank group, but they declined. Mana Hariri, sorry.
And likewise Maungaharuru Tangitu Trust.
Ngāti Kahananu Iwi Incorporated has had Ngaio Tuka around the tank group table. Ngāti Paro Hapu Trust in recent times has had Te Kaha Waikarangi sitting around the tank group table. Hiratonga Tai Whenua, Mare Apatu. Tamatea Tai Whenua, not present in the tank group, not present here, but certainly sitting around the Maori committee table. Similar with Te Whanganui Rotu Tai Whenua. Tūwhare Toa Maori Trust Board, not present in either Maori committee, this committee.
Yes, in this committee.
In this committee?
Yeah, this committee.
Oh, sorry.
Much.
Is he trust board or is he the Hapu Trust?
The Tūwhare Toa Hapu Forum.
Yeah, there's some subtle differences there.
He raised that concern about who was being recognised in the list.
There's also a trust, the Kairako Hapu Trust, that are just currently being formed as a result of the settlement. So they come from Kairako back this way. You wouldn't know that. They've just forming over the last 18 months, I think, as a result of settlement. So they're coming into their own hapu rights. So these are just things to consider.
Well, I think regardless, can we just take a step back, if I might add in here. I know this paper had come for an update and thinking in terms of what the framework was to be that we needed to comply with for consultation pre-notification. That's a large part of the paper. I want to pick up on some of Paul's comments, really. The things we need to be aware of is, regardless of whether people have been involved in some way or form, either in tank or at this table, I don't count the Māori committee as being, cognizant of all the stuff in here. This is not their kaupapa, so I don't think you can assume that. The reality is we've got a complex, detailed plan which will arrive at a point which then needs to go to consultation. And if I gave you, several hundred pages of explanation and a plan for the councillors to get their head around and expected you to come up with a consensus and get some advice on that current version within 3 weeks, we'd probably be pushed to do that. So I think it's probably less reasonable to expect under-resourced, busy iwi who don't have a whole lot of staff to be able to synthesise a current version of this plan in a matter of weeks. I don't think that's reasonable, and I don't think it's reasonable heading into Christmas either from a timing perspective. It's not that we want to stop the progress, I just think we need to, in terms of being reasonable, step back and look at what needs to happen. If we're going to get quality feedback, a couple of things need to happen. Good time to be able to look at it and giving them some resources to be able to do it. I've raised it before and I just want to raise it again. That helps. So I know there's 9 iwi authorities mentioned there. As Tangata Whenua reps, we haven't discussed the detail of how consultation might occur in the best way, but there's certainly common issues for many of those groups, common catchments, and so support with advice or whatever to help them put together their response might be done in groupings rather than talking about 8 or 9 separate iwi authorities. So I just wanted to put that out there, but I do think we need to be thoughtful around looking for a formal response on a complicated document in a short time frame. I would say a couple of weeks by Crown entities or others doing that. I don't think that's reasonable for this type of document, quite honestly.
You know, I think if you use the example of the next item on the agenda, whereby the RPC members were meant to respond to the review issue, only 2 have, and these are organisations that are a lot better resourced than those ones who are out there.
I think
That expectation, and it does sort of showcase the fact that people who are not resourced or not informed will not necessarily respond.
But how are councillors greater resourced? How am I as an individual? All those people do tank and they work away. They bring this to, and I'm supposed to absorb all that, and there's a huge amount of trust. It's like if you're a director of Air New Zealand, do you really want to go into how the propellers work? I mean, in the end, don't you have to say you've delegated some people and you look at had big discussions around here. In the end, don't you say, right, you look at the fundamentals and you've got to trust the detail? Otherwise, how am I more resourced than you?
I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about some of those groups out there.
What do you mean groups out?
Well,
No, I don't have more staff than you. You have the same staff as me. You have the same staff as I do.
But you're not writing papers for my board explaining this and then analysing it for them and then coming back with recommendations and then...
You mean your board don't delegate? You've got to run to your board that haven't delegated you to make a decision here?
Yep.
No.
Well, mine is.
If you want formal feedback, you're going out to iwi authorities. You're not coming out to Tania, so they will want to understand what's the deal here.
So, I mean, I have to go to the people of Havelock North who voted me in, and I do. And the people of Hastings and Flaxmere who I talk to, they ask me about things. They ask me about their jobs, and I don't see how it's any different.
I think we're off the track here. What is being talked about here is about a pre-consultation. So when you send out something for pre-consultation, my view, it's more like just an alert. In the near future, this thing's going to come at you. It's just my view is to tell you, this is a pre-consultation. It's not to be the consultation of diving into all of the detail. That comes later. The pre-consultation say, look, we've got a plan change coming up here. This is the area it covers. These are the sorts of issues it covers, and we're alerting you to it. Now, what you would expect back from that is not the detail of what people see in respect to the plan change and so on. It would be, do we agree with going ahead with this or not? So it's a big go. Go. When the thing goes out for consultation, that's when you get into all the detail. All the intense discussions you'd expect. I see this in a completely different context from what I think the conversation's been around, giving people time and resources to deal with a 700-page document. That's the next stage. This is the first stage. It's on the way, folks. It's coming.
Thank you for your clarity.
What?
Thank you for your clarity.
Thank you for that.
That's what it is. It's got to come out the tube.
Pre-consultation.
I acknowledge that point of view, but I disagree. I don't think the amendments to the RMA, where iwi authorities, their feedback would be sought, is intended to be fire away. It's an opportunity for iwi authorities to have a meaningful input at that stage prior to notification. So if they want to dive in detail, they will dive in detail. If they don't, they don't. But I think we have to be able to give them an opportunity to have a look at it. Now, I'm not saying we need months and months. I'm just saying the suggestion was that the standard would be a couple of weeks. I don't think that's reasonable for this kind of document.
No. So
we can agree that.
Yeah. I think the weeks, not months, was possibly a little bit misleading in terms of what Gavin's really trying to say is that for this project to stay on track, this cannot go on for months because this is only the pre-consultation and then we've got the notification phase. So certainly not 2 weeks, and 20 working days is the minimum for under the notification for receiving submissions anyway. That's 4 weeks, so that'd be your starting position. My comment about Christmas was really with Christmas coming up. Are we going to require this before Christmas? That's a bit of a possibility, or do you just throw it to the other side and give people a bit of time, given that January's a write-off? You need to form a view as a committee as to how much pre-consultation feedback you want, really, and how much time you want to give for that before you get to the next point of recommending notification. To the point that we don't want to hold up progress, Tanya. I think we want to get on with this pre-consultation. So let's get some advice from you if there's anybody on the list who you believe legitimately meets the tests for an iwi authority that we haven't got. Get this out to them, get the ball rolling, and you just give us some guidance about whether, by the end of December's acceptable or...
But we don't have a plan yet. We haven't completed the plan.
No, we don't.
What are you proposing to consult on? Because the other thing is...
The working draft, because if we wait to the point that you've got a finalised plan, you're at basically the point of notification. All you're going to do then is hold up notification for another, say, 2-month period, to then do the pre-consultation, then to receive that, then to consider it, then to make further changes if that's what you're going to do.
Is the process
And by this stage, there's no reason why you can't commence pre-consultation with a working draft.
Absolutely. So what would be the... so you're given a certain time to respond. I'm just trying to figure out in my head, thanks to Councillor Barker. You'd only be giving, say, the Tai Whenua will give you a couple of pages on things that concern them. That's all you'd expect, wouldn't you? Just areas of concern.
I do think it's important to note that Gavin's paper does specifically point it out. There's 2 legs here. There's Section 3 and there's Section 4A, and so it's not and they can be combined. But in terms of the Section 4A consultation with iwi authorities, that requires council to have particular regard to their feedback.
So that puts these iwi
prior to producing a plan for notification.
So the iwi, that puts the iwi, the paper says in paragraph 8 that essentially the feedback from the iwi authorities is to be given the same regard as that from the any feedback we receive from territorial authorities or from the Ministry of Environment, and so on and so on.
Section 3.
Yep.
Yeah, but under Section 4, you must have particular regard to the feedback from iwi authorities. So this is the first time that this RMA amendment is going to be included in our process. It is intended to give iwi a proper look, proper time and proper feedback, not a rush job. And I'm not advocating a ridiculous amount of time. I'm advocating a reasonable amount of time to get that quality feedback. And
Have you got a time length in mind?
Someone give us a time.
6 weeks?
Yeah.
6 weeks?
6 weeks.
That's prior to Christmas.
No, but if we back that up, what are we giving them? Because we've talked today about things that are outstanding. I've raised some issues from Maori perspective, just off my top of my head. We won't have. What version are you proposing to send out? Because we haven't seen a version 8. What we've seen is version 7, and we've had some discussions about bits and pieces. So realistically, I think we should be aiming to December to get a better formulated plan together so that we know what it looks like. I thought that's what we were aiming for anyway. And then this paper explains that the process after that is pre-notification consultation. Yep. That would happen after Christmas.
Well, we're on the cusp of version 8, though, aren't we?
Yes, so the intention is to bring version 8 to the 12th December meeting, and then it's for this committee.
I think
to decide.
it's naive, though, to also say that those authorities of which are listed here haven't had some insight. I mean, that's not real. The reality is that the people that will deal with this have most likely had some eyesight on it. And I just think this is a pre-consultation. The people involved will have some knowledge and understanding of the issues, not in complete version. They haven't got version 8 yet, nor have we. So the 6 week criteria sounds okay to me. But let's say what it is. It's pre-consultation.
And at this, if I can add, at this point in time, version 7 of our draft Plan Change 9 is out there online, along with scores of technical reports and tank group meeting records and the likes. So anyone could be filling their boots right now reading that material if they so inclined. I'm just saying that.
Good on them if they do. What document are you going to be giving to the territorial authorities to give feedback on?
So we will bring let's say it's version 8. Say we bring version 8 to you on 12th of December, and you as a committee say, do you know what, this is good enough to go out. So the same document will go out to those pre-consultation people. That will give this committee then an opportunity to effectively stand to one side and see the feedback, and I'm sure the feedback will be, will be pointed and voluminous, and then you will have an opportunity to decide subsequent to that, okay, what plan are we going to push out for notification to the public? So that is the big moment when you say this is, and that will be change 9, and so through that process you're going to go from 8 to 9. And this committee is going to then decide whether or not, or on what basis it's going to punch that out to the public, and then the public gets involved, and then everyone's in.
That sounds like a logical process to me.
That's fine. It's just the timing of it. So in December, you end up 12th of December, whenever it is we have version 8 goes live.
It's in your hands.
Yep. So then we shunt that out to pre-consultation with the territorial authorities, the Ministry of Environment, whatever it was that. Now the challenge there, of course, that falls over Christmas.
So you've got to decide.
So when's the next RPC meeting after in the new year? When's the
in February.
It's in February.
It's in late February.
Late February. So that if we had late February to consider what version 9 is going to be, that would give the Christmas period where everyone goes on holiday, and then about 4 weeks or so over February to deal with it.
So we may not bring that to the 20th of February. It might be the March meeting.
Yeah, because the reality is, if we look at agreeing a version 8 for pre-notification consultation on the 12th of December, you'll get that ready, you'll send that out over Christmas, you can't count that as weeks. So you would start to count from probably mid-January, and then you're looking at the end of February by the time that TLA's government and iwi have come back with their comments. And so you'd have to have time to collate that, analyse that, then bring that back for the March, Harry, I would have thought. Even that's probably pushing it for you, but...
Yeah, and we're trying not to count our chickens on the 12th.
Just observe, you've lost the quorum already.
Yeah, we have.
You're about to crash the quorum completely.
It's not a decision.
Well, the point is that, feedback, but we could have actually, in my view, got here to a quicker point if we had in front of us a proposed timeline that people saw, rather than sort of make it up in our heads as we went.
Probably didn't dare.
Before we shut it all down, Mr Chair, if you wouldn't mind, the very name that we run under tank are the 4 rivers. They are predominantly in Heretaunga.
They're all in Heretaunga?
No, we've got, they are all in there, but part of it is mais. The iwi authority is Ngāti Kahununga. We all know that. Its subsections are in here as the Tai Whenuas, all named. And this is not the first time. I mean, we've already got an operational plan that was done by this council. In fact, this is the 3rd one we're working on, Generation 3. So we're regurgitating. Rather annoying to have to listen to it. What I really want to know is, with the post-governance sitting around here, and we're going to have to hear these, do we go and talk to the Tai Whenuas and those who sat on the tank meetings, on the 40-something meetings you've had? Or is that going to preclude us being able to sit here? That is the worry. That always has been why we haven't spoken at the tank meetings. Now, I'll have to say this now. I've attended several tank meetings, as you're aware of, probably from day one. And while I've been at some, the staff have done a great job. They've asked for voting. And I have seen Maori have not voted, neither for or against, and abstained. They wouldn't even vote that they have abstained, indicated that they had. Now, I don't know what they've agreed to. It does open up a whole can of worms, and who's going to go through all of that and sort out what the real mess is out there in Marriedom.
I'd just like to just provide some sort of further clarification on one of the points. In the latter meetings, especially this year, the Treaty Partners Group was requested and was given an opportunity not to vote, so that they had additional time and that staff would have additional time to spend with them to go over the issues, answer questions through our, more of a bilateral relationship. And so we got their feedback, but it wasn't necessarily at the meeting. And so, and that was in acknowledgement of the volume of paper that was coming at them and the complexity of the issues, and also some of the support that we were providing around giving them some advice to help understand the documents in the form of external consultants.
As the process was collaboration, and it was supposed to be through the groups, plus Marriedom.
Peter, this pre-consultation process which is envisioned here should flush out if there are any residual concerns or issues.
Yes, but how do we, and who is it that's going to have to do it when it's in our patch? We'd be expected that we're going to have to do some of that work. So that is why I need to know it in front of everybody, so we all know what's going on. This is going to happen eventually in Wairua and all the other areas. So we've got to tidy it up now.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one of the things you need to work through is whether you're going to articulate your interests on behalf of your entity at this table, as a decision maker at this table, or through these other statutory processes where you get other rights of engagement and consultation.
That's sounding like then that we will have to, as a group, we will have to go out and talk to all of those that have been through the 40-something tank meetings.
Yeah, 41.
And that's what I think was raised by the co-chair.
Well,
who's got to do all that work?
Even though we have been asked for input, some of it has not been received, so there's no point in going on any further. So I'll just ask, can someone move this recommendation, please?
I'm happy to.
Second, all in favour? Thank you. So we've got one last agenda item, and I don't really think there's much point in pursuing it, given there's only one or two responses from the group, and maybe it becomes an agenda item at the next meeting.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does your letter represent the official position of this group?
My letter represents
on the review of this
the
committee?
position of Ngāti Pāhura.
Huh? So say again?
Each group was asked to submit a response. I submitted mine on behalf of Ngāti Pāhura.
And you signed it, the chair of Ngāti Pāhura?
Yeah.
Right.
Basically, Tūhui said they don't want anything to do with this, and Toro said he wants to sack us. They want to sack himself, just us.
Is the review completed?
We're moving along on this. What I'm saying is that has been insufficient response from the parties to actually have a good conversation about it. So I would prefer
to have a conversation about what was submitted.
I think the review's been abandoned by apathy, hasn't it?
No,
Not really.
Not really.
Not really, Mr. Chairman, from Matauranga. We were in negotiations with the Crown over those times and just couldn't be here. So there was no way we attended most of the meetings. And I have made that known several times to the committee.
And I'm all more than willing to speak on behalf of all of them, but I don't think they would allow it. So.
And I've currently been charged to draft something on behalf of Hiratanga Tamatea's settlement, so I need some time.
How many weeks?
Yes.
Only just recently.
I think the recommendation, it wasn't a recommendation, but the intention for Te Pau Whakarai to take time to go out and meet with each of the groups is a good one. And I fully expect that there will be more feedback forthcoming about the RPC face-to-face. So I think that's a good approach. This is not something that's set in time. This was something we had to do by a certain date in terms of doing a review. But at any point, people can bring up comments to improve the RPC. And I do think the discussions were, I assume that paragraph 11 still stands in there, that our new Pau Whakarai is happy to have the conversations as part of the broader conversations you're having. we're all after the pursuit of excellence and improving ourselves, so it'll come.
Yeah, and I would like councillors to give me their view as well.
Excellent.
Yep.
It'll
So
come.
if councillors could give me a one-pager. No, and have you already, you think?
No, we did it. We sat down here and did it with you.
So you would welcome feedback?
I would welcome feedback from councillors.
Yep.
Review's over.
Read Toro's one first, that'll encourage you. That will empower you. That's exactly the words I was looking for.
And you want this before or after the bottom line?
Just recognise you've all been in denial for so long. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. And whatever wishes, we'll just receive this.
You can't. You haven't
It's all good. Okay, so
Soon it's done.
goodbye.
yeah, so
We're into recommendation phase.
Tātou, a te atu o koutou manaki i a mātou e hoki ki o mātou kaina. No leira i te whakamininga ma te atu o koutou manaki te aki mana mea tona mata ki a te ahoi i hoki ringa o koutou mana o koutou e rātu whai. Ake, ameni.